wealth in Canada instead of the U.S. And he is joining us here now at Post 9. Congressman, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, great to be with you. And it is such a source of frustration that the great dream of most American cannabis companies is to become sufficiently investable to go public in Canada. And now we see Canadian companies sending their marijuana exports into the United States.
So how much of a head start do you think these Canadian companies are getting, and whose fault is it that they're getting that head start?
It is the fault of the United States federal government, and we see this in Canada. We also see it overseas in Israel, in the United Kingdom, where time and again you see advanced research, but then the opportunity to commercialize that research largely exists within the United States, where our state governments have democratized access to cannabis. But because the federal government says that cannabis in all forms, under any circumstances, regardless of its medical propriety under state law, is illegal, and that means that so much of our financial community can't get involved institutionally in growing these businesses in the United States.
But cities and states are moving on their own on this.
They are, but investors can't. You see, we can't get institutional investors into the game in a world in which they fear this great crackdown potentially from the federal government. You also see universities, medical institutions unwilling to engage in collaborative research to unlock cures because they're worried that might impair other monies that they receive from the federal government. So it's this odd dichotomy where our states, our innovative community, they're moving forward. The federal government has its head in the sand like an ostrich, and I'm hoping to make some changes there.
Well, you know, you say the government is the impediment here, but it's not so much that it's just bureaucracy or an administrative logjam, right? I mean, it's a policy position of this administration that they do not want to ease up the national regulations, correct?
Well, of this administration and every administration
yes.
dating back to the 1970s, cannabis has been a Schedule I narcotic. Cocaine, even other forms of opioids are deemed as Schedule II or lower. I think it's largely a political calculus that went in the 70s to labeling marijuana in such a way as to not create the opportunities for investment, business growth, job creation. There's a green wave going on across the country, and unfortunately, our policies are driving the benefit of that consumption into foreign markets instead of growing that wealth in the United States.
Congressman, I want to switch focus and talk about trade. Some positive trade headlines we just heard between the U.S. and South Korea. But the main focus that markets have is on China. Does the example of perhaps Mexico and South Korea suggest to you that a deal will be done on China? And do you support the kind of tough stance the president's taken?
Well, if we go back to when the president made his statements about TPP, the assumption would be that China would sweep through Asia and create their own sort of political and economic center of gravity. They're impenetrable by the United States. I think today you see that the strategy regarding China isn't solely direct engagement, but it's also to create other bilateral, multilateral trading relationships, which hopefully will bring China to the table under more favorable terms. As you well understand, leverage is only about two things: the amount of pain you're willing to withstand and the amount of pain you're willing to inflict. China's willing to withstand a lot of pain, and so I think the movement today, while it may not be the biggest blockbuster, certainly is symbolic of a strategy to engage in these relationships throughout Asia.
And finally, just on the marijuana point, are you actually advocating for full-on federal legalized use of recreational marijuana, or are you just talking about medical marijuana? And do you think there's any shot that your party, the Republican Party, can get on board with that?
Well, we need a youth movement in the Republican Party if we're going to be able to advance the cause of cannabis reform. I don't believe that this is an issue where the federal government needs to be involved. I think the question you raised is one for our 50 states. My role in the movement is to make sure that the federal government doesn't literally stand between patients and something that could make them feel better or do better on the medical side and on the research side. And that's where we're seeing the impact on the markets, research-based companies, and then having to acquire product and cultures across international borders.
Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.